Maybe you too.
Yeah.
And a really good one too.
Rebecca just pumped it. All right, folks, we'll get underway. It's 10:30. Kia ora, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Central Otago District Council. Noting we have two councillors on Teams, being Deputy Mayor Gillespie and Councillor Cullen. Welcome to you too, and we have no apologies, which is marvellous. Thank you all very much for your attendance. We move first to a public forum where we have five people joining us through Teams, which Rebecca will manage with her usual aplomb. So firstly, we welcome Lee Overton from Central Otago Health Incorporated, who's obviously a grant applicant for later discussions today. Kia ora, Lee.
Yes, good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. The floor is yours.
Right. Yes, my name is Lee Overton. And is there feedback coming through?
No, we can hear you fine.
Right. I'm Deputy Chairman of Central Otago Health Incorporated, and the purpose of this mission is to request funding from Central Otago for Central Otago Health Incorporated to the value of $7,556 per annum for 3 years from the Central Otago District Council. This being for administration purposes, which has already been detailed in the original application. First of all, the Society wishes to thank the Council for its valuable financial support since the year 2000. Central Otago Health Incorporated, now in which I'll refer to as COINC, began its journey in 1992 with the formation by the Central Otago District Council of the Central Otago Advisory Group. By 1998, following a number of structural and funding changes, CODC resolved that an operating company and an incorporated society were formed, and the result is the existing Central Otago Health Services and COINC. COINC was formed in the year 2000 to retain ownership of the assets of Dunstan Hospital on behalf of the community. The structure ensures the separation of governance and management. And the purpose of COINC is to provide a link between Dunstan Hospital and the regions of the Central Otago and Wanaka communities served by the hospital and to represent the interests of the community. To own and protect the assets of Dunstan Hospital for the members of the community. To seek funds and make grant applications for the provision of assets. To own 100% of the shares in Central Otago Health Services Limited, to appoint the directors of Central Otago Health Services, and the board of COINC comprises the following: 5 members each elected at the time of the local body elections from the 4 wards of Central Otago District and 1 from the Wanaka ward of QLDC. 1 member appointed by CODC, 1 member from Tangata Whenua, 2 members appointed by service providers, 1 of which is to be a doctor. I now wish to comment on the council report for this agenda item. First of all, COINC is not a trust as described in this report. It is an incorporated society. Now some comment on the evaluation matrix regarding COINC. Under purpose, I do not agree that COINC does not score fully on the subject of empowering local communities, enhancing the well-being of residents and deliverance of community outcomes. Despite what is shown in the matrix under criteria, our project, or rather our role, is explicitly defined, as I hope I've illustrated. Our costs are strictly kept to a minimum. Some of us do not claim meeting fees. There is a broad community gain, and our sustainability is indirectly dependent on central government policy, funding, fundraising and continued support from CODC. Overall, I do not agree that the council report is a fair and reasonable assessment of the important role of COINC in our region for our absolutely essential public secondary health service. Finally, rural hospital structures within the Southern District Health Board area vary widely. For example, Waitaki has council ownership and Frankton is funded solely by the Southern District Health Board. At Dunstan, we have Southern District Health Board and community funding, including grants from the Central Lakes Trust and Friends from the Friends from Dunstan group. The structure we have involving COINC allows for community involvement and the ability to acquire extra income for our directors at Dunstan to use at their discretion, a distinct benefit to health services in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Appreciate your call. Any questions from councillors?
Hi Lee, it's Lindley Claridge speaking. How are you?
Fine, thanks, Lindley.
Lee, I heard you say that there is a meeting fee, but a lot of the members don't accept the meeting fee. But I expect the meeting fee is to cover mileage and some of the many hours of volunteer work that goes in there. Could you tell us what the meeting fee is, please?
The meeting fee is $50, which is claimed by some and not by others. The transport costs involve costs in getting to meetings, which are held usually monthly, but some of our meetings have been held on Zoom during the COVID lockdowns.
Thanks for that.
Any other questions, councillors? All right, thank you very much, Lee. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We now move to our second public forum appearances on the Central Otago District Arts Trust, and welcome to Rebecca De Jong and Jen Bean. Kia ora koutou.
You're muted, Jan. Jan, you're muted.
Is that better? Okay,
Yeah.
Is that all right now?
As good as gold, thank you.
Good. Okay, thanks. Morena, everybody. First of all, as chair of the Central Otago District Arts Trust, I want to sincerely thank Council for their past financial support and for the really positive relationships that we've been able to build with Council staff over that time. Without this, we would not be able to operate in the professional and cooperative way that we do. And we certainly would not have the expertise and dedication of our coordinator. The Central Otago District Arts Trust is best described as an umbrella organisation for all the arts in the region: visual, performance, literary, and everything in between. I've been involved as a trustee of CODAT since its formation nearly 13 years ago. And for some of these years, I've been the guardian of a treasure trove of documents in both hard and soft copy, going back to the inauguration of the Trust in 2008-2009. And recently I had the reason to go back and look for some archived information, which meant that I had to go back into the beginnings. And the beginnings were very interesting. They were several community-led consultations and the subsequent art strategy upon which the Trust was founded. This working program resulted in establishing the commitments, the ideals and principles which we're still working with and we're still mindful of today, 13 years later, and namely that the purposes of the Trust are exclusively any purpose which benefits and promotes the arts and artistic endeavours and principles in the Central Otago District. Moreover, we have an ongoing obligation to keep working towards establishing Central Otago as an important arts destination. So what's changed over 13 years? At our annual planning meeting in January this year, it was really encouraging to note that most of the high and medium priority objectives, which were set down in 2009, have been completed. And we now have the freedom and creativity to concentrate on what remains. And these are now mainly public art projects. There's little doubt that public art enlivens our space and gives us food for thought and contemplation. It's not always comfortable, and it sometimes challenges us. And it may be in the form of sculpture, installations, murals, or some other enhancement of the environment like the chorus boxes. Over the years too, we've developed strong and supportive relationships with our local artists across all genres. To support artists in their own environment is a strong and key commitment for CODAT. All artists across all genres in Central Otago need suitable space in order to promote themselves, their work, and our region. We will continue to advocate on their behalf for maintaining a community gallery space where they can exhibit their work. We're pleased to also be able to collaborate with local museums and businesses, and next on our list is looking at the extensive art collection which is in storage at Central Stories Gallery, and ensuring that these works are well stored and appropriately catalogued. Vicky at the Central app has confirmed future support for us by running arts-related stories under her Be Better tab, with a view to giving us our own button on the app. Finally, I'd like to make Council aware of the commitment of the trustees, all of whom assist me running the trust, and they give willingly of their own time and knowledge. We'll continue to work towards highlighting the profiles of original artists, writers, museums, and performers who live within this region and make it a better place for us to live in. I'm going to briefly hand over to Rebecca. She just has a few things. I think we've still got, have we still got a little bit of time? A little bit of time? Okay, right.
Hello everybody. I'll just quickly run through this. The CODC grant enables us to work on our responsibilities, which are identified within the arts strategy and through connecting the Central Otago arts community, businesses and organisations, as well as those from throughout New Zealand. It also provides us the opportunity, or provides me the opportunity to spend time seeking funding for bigger projects, which further support and develop the arts in our community.
Rebecca, sorry. Yeah. Rebecca, can you just move a bit closer to your computer? You're dropping in and out a wee bit.
Okay, is that better?
I think it is.
Yeah. It is not unusual for me to be seeking large amounts of money over and above the CODC grant from funding organisations across the country for arts projects. This money typically gets spent in the region on services and programs which benefit Central Otago people. This year and into 2022, we have a number of these projects on the go, including People in Place, an artist boot camp, cover to cover, the Unichem art workshops and mural project, art classes in Cromwell, the Forest Box and the Teviot Street upgrade projects in association with CODC Community Development.
That's the 5 minutes, sorry, Rebecca.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you anyway.
No worries, we've just got quite a long agenda today. Are there any questions from councillors? I've got one. Jan, you mentioned needing to look at the storage and cataloguing for art items held in Central Stories. You've got concerns that in that regard? I would have thought that was, say, the advice jobs.
We don't have concerns actually, but I think it's just nice to know that works as part of our responsibility, that I think it is interesting for us to know that works are well stored and looked after, and that they've been catalogued. I think I'm not suggesting they have, but I think we need to go through that process and really have a good look and see what's there. And,
right, thank you.
To assist in a particular collection that they have at Central Stories, and I think it would benefit us. Well, absolutely, what is that? Yeah, absolutely, it would.
Okay, I think that we started to break up there, but I can pick that you haven't got any concerns. You just want to give it a once over, and particularly in the catalogue and side of it. Yes,
exactly. And to be fair, I don't think Rebecca or I really know the depth of the collection and exactly what's there. So it would be very helpful to do that.
More CODAT's understanding. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Owen Booth and John Brindle from Sport Otago. Welcome, gentlemen. Just be with us in a moment.
Good to go.
Yeah, we just
1 moment.
1 minute.
I'm just trying to get your beautiful faces up on the screen. Probably not entirely essential, but we like to do things properly. Yeah, right up, fire off, gentlemen. Welcome.
Ata Mario, Mayor Tim, councillors. Council has our application, so I won't repeat what we stated. Rather, we'll emphasise that the Central Otago District Council is a key stakeholder and foundation key state investor in the establishment of Sport Central. Council support for Sport Central has been absolutely critical to the viability of our work within Central Otago since 2001 and ongoing. Council is one of 4 key partners that, through their funding, enable Sport Central to continue to service physical activity aspirations of the Central Otago region. Excuse me. Council's been a core funder of Sport Central since its inception, initially with the appointment of Bill Fossel, regional coordinator, and with growth and demand, an additional staff member that is focused on meeting the needs of community and schools. And that's a demand that continues to this day, and which is increasing to reflect the growth of population and changing demographics of the district. We do have a more aged, active population, and also an increased demand for greater play, active recreation and sport infrastructure, along with growing demand for provision of advice, support, guidance and templates, clubs and organisations. And reflecting this, the team has grown by a further active recreation role. It just reinforces that Central Otago is the region's area of phenomenal growth and hence expansion of services. Now, Council currently provides Sport Central with a grant of $41,549. And we're extremely appreciative of that. Within our application, it's an adjustment to $48,000 to reflect the application of inflation adjustment, and also to recognise the reduction in income from events. COVID-19 severely impacted and reduced the range and number of events that are able to be offered, and it severely curtailed the event industry, which we provided service to. And that certainly generated some income for Sport Central, which is no longer realised. However, we still provide community-focused events such as stride, ride and slide, rainbow runs, walk and wheel, etc. These are participation events that encourage and promote physical activity and community well-being. They don't generate revenue. And as I've referred to, our staffing has increased to reflect the increased demand from a rapidly growing population. The other trend is that prior to COVID, but now very evident, is a drop-off in physical activity of our youth. If we don't put in the continued effort and focus on our tamariki, that's the 0 to 12 age group, and our rangatahi, secondary age group 13 to 18, that trend of disengagement from physical activity will accelerate, with a major impact for our communities in terms of increased chronic health issues, mental health, and overall community well-being. So look, in finishing, we really value the long-standing relationship and partnership with Council and seek your consideration of supporting our application. And we're pleased to take any questions.
Thanks, John. Questions, councillors? Doesn't appear to be any. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again in person.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
And we now have Joe Knight, also from Sports Central, well, from Sports Central as opposed to Sport Otago. Just note that difference. Joe will be with us now. Here we go. Smooth as silk. You've got 5 minutes, Joe. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou, me Tim and councillors. Ko Joe Aho. I am the Community Sport and Active Recreation Advisor for Sports Central. As part of my role, I organise the Central Otago Sports Awards, and we are applying for funding for $1,000 per year for the next 3 years. Council funding will allow us to attract an inspiring public speaker who is capable of engaging with top athletes and regional as well. We are currently in negotiations with a highly successful Olympian, and if council were to assist with funding, we'd make that speaker available to a council or community event in the CODC area. The social side of things, the sports awards are about inspiring, sharing and empowering our sport community. They're a place where the community connects with like-minded people and share stories from the sporting year. Many new relationships were established at the awards this year. I saw athlete to athlete, athlete to coach, and then athletes with sponsors and funders. And it's an event where Olympians and the top sports people are accessible to all of the community. The awards are not a money-making venture. We're very grateful to have 10 local sponsors that support the awards and who have committed to supporting the 2022 event. Their contribution helps to cover the free tickets we give to finalists, and that's approximately 80 tickets. And we use our local community wherever possible for venue, catering, printing, media, trophies, etc. Environmental wellbeing. Well, many of the sports that were recognised take place in our stunning local environment, and this was showcased in the visual presentation in the awards evening. And by keeping it as local as possible, our environmental footprint is light. Cultural wellbeing, manaakitanga was celebrated through the expression of aroha, hospitality, generosity and mutual respect. We had a broad range of nominations this year and were able to celebrate an athlete with neurodiversity winning one of our categories. We're hoping to engage the Mount Aspiring Kapahaka group to assist in welcoming our guests in 2022. And our goal is to repeat the success of our 2021 awards and have another sellout event. And we'd really appreciate the support of the Central Otago District Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? No? All right. Thanks very much, Joe.
Cheers.
Nice to see you. Thank you for your time. And next we have Sam Marshall, who is coming to public forum to speak on our waste services. And Sam, are you there? You're on mute, Sam. Still on mute.
Is that me?
That's you.
Oh, hello.
Welcome. Just give 2 moments. We'll just do some technology here. Do some technology. That's not even good. That's okay. Possibly is. You understood it.
Okay, so am I going now? Is that correct?
Yep, you're good to go, and you've got 5 minutes. Welcome, Sam.
Great, thank you. So I'd just like to start. Thank you to the Mayor and councillors for the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Sam Marshall. I'm a ratepayer and a resident in Ranfurly. And I'd just like to say it's a great town to live in as well. So I am quite passionate about it. I'm presenting to you this morning on the waste services review that's currently out for consultation. And I see you've got a report later in the agenda that relates to that review and some costs that go with it. For such a significant council activity, there's been a lack of consultation opportunities within the submissions period. It's been open for 4 weeks and closes this Friday. In that 4-week consultation period included a week and a half, we were all at level 4 lockdown. There have been no public meetings or similar opportunities provided to find out more information for the public, and I found that it's generally pretty, well, not very well known about in terms of some of the proposals in the town. I'm particularly concerned about the statements on page 5 of the document where it's stated that there could be some reductions in terms of the Ranfurly transfer station hours as part of the review. But unfortunately, there's no information provided to back up the statements that are made about a lack of usage of this transfer station in Ranfurly, or the cost of it, or even what changes are being proposed to the hours that the transfer station would be open. So that's making it particularly difficult for anyone here to make comment on what is actually being proposed. So Ranfurly being a small rural town, we really need all the council services that we can keep, including our rubbish and recycling, to make it an attractive place to live and to be able to run a business here. We also, as a town, provide services for other communities like Naseby and Patiaroa. And certainly downgrading the Ranfurly transfer station, that's going to affect other communities that surround this area as well. The transfer station, that's a great resource and we're lucky to have it, but it's already severely limited by not being open enough. In winter, it's only open for 10 hours a week, and 4 of those hours are between Monday to Friday, which makes it really difficult for anyone running the business to get to it during the week. Summer hours are still only 15 hours per week in total, which is pretty limited. In comparison, the Cromwell and Alexandra transfer stations are open for 70 hours per week all year round. Ranfurly ratepayers pay the same $449 per year on their rates for waste services across the district as any other ratepayer in the district does. However, we are already restricted in terms of our transfer station hours. The services at the transfer station here are restricted as well. I mean, I wouldn't expect it to be the same as some of the bigger centres, but it's interesting to note that we don't have any car body removal service, no asbestos can be taken, no oil recycling, and no hazardous waste can be taken, and those services are all provided at the Alex and Cromwell transfer stations. I think it seems from the consultation document that there's a goal of trying to make some cost savings, and I feel that's a great thing to consider in the review. However, when I was reading the agenda, I see there's a report today to council asking you to approve spending $200,000 for the waste services review with a direct award of a contract to a consultant without, from what I've read, any quotes or going to the market to seek tenders for that work. I'd suggest that that's a great opportunity to have a look at least seeking some competitive pricing to try and make a saving on that $200,000 spend. The other thing I noted, which isn't mentioned in your consultation, is that you spend $3.75 million each year on waste and recycling. And I got that figure from the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan. So there's probably some great opportunities for council as a whole to make some savings in the waste activity without necessarily having to cut the transfer station hours within Ranfurly and Roxburgh. So yeah, I hope that perhaps is useful in the process, but I guess I'd close just by saying please don't restrict the transfer station hours any further in Ranfurly, because it is a great service. I'd certainly like to keep it, and I'm sure other people in the community would. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam. Questions from councillors?
I just had one. Thank you very much, Sam. It's good to get the Ranfurly perspective, so thank you for taking that time. I just wondered, you talked about, we do spend a really astonishing amount of money of our council budget on dealing with waste, and you suggested that there'd be ways to save costs. I just wondered if you had any that might be relevant to Ranfurly.
The first thing I suggest is that it would be particularly important for you as councillors to and for council staff to understand the contract renewal that's coming up, I think in 2023, which the review is leading up to. Because the way that you write that contract, the performance measures that you put in place, and the way that you supervise that contract, and that'll probably be the majority of that $3.75 million spend, will be one of the key ways that you can save significant amounts of money, you know, or it may cost you more in terms of what comes back from the market, but the structure and the care that's taken around that contract will be critical for Ranfurly and the rest of the district's communities.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Sam. Greatly appreciate your input today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Mostly worked well enough. It's not quite the same as having people in front of us, but in the circumstances, it got us through. So thank you, Rebecca. Right, this takes us to confirmation of our minutes from our last council meeting, which was held on the 11th of August. Anybody happy with those? Any changes anybody's concerned about? If not, somebody wish to move them to and correct record. Thank you, Tamer. Seconded, Tracy. All those in favour? Aye, against, and that's carried. Our declarations of interest, members are reminded of the need to be vigilant to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as a member and any private or other external interests they may have. I'll note that I have conflict on item 2117 in this website. Anything else?
I have two.
Stephen?
21.711, a road stopping. 21.7.18, appointments to the hearing fund.
Thank you. And Tracy?
21.7.2, I'm going to sit out of the complete process.
Thank you.
I have a conflict also on that item.
Sorry, Shirley, struggled to hear you there.
I have a conflict with the same item, 21.7.2. I'm an employee.
Very good. Thank you very much.
And I'll have a conflict for 21.7.18.
Right. You got all those, Wayne? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Alrighty. Takes us to reports for decisions. The first one is the community grant applications to council, and Stephen, that is yours.
Okay, welcome everyone. And Nikki's going to speak to us. So where's Nick?
Hiding in the corner.
Yeah.
So I guess this is an exciting process because this is our first time doing a festival funding round for community grants. I'm going to take it that you've read the report and the extensive attachments and hope that it's evident to you that I've spent a lot of time and put a lot of consideration into the recommendations that I have presented to you today. I just have a couple of points I want to note, and then Paula has a couple of additions as well. So I just wanted to run you through my logic on some of the larger applications and why I ended up with the recommendations I did. And so when it comes to heritage, arts, and sports, I started by thinking about the fact that the Heritage Trust had received $40,000 for the past 3 years. And this year, through the long-term plan, the Como Museum increased from 35,000 to 40,000. Sport Otago is approximately 40,000, and the Arts Trust has been sitting at 35,000 for many years now. And so I think it would be good, based on the assessment, and you can see that they all provide similar values to the community, to think about how we can get all of those organizations on a similar playing field. And so with that, my recommendation is that we look at doing that, and I started then by suggesting the Arts Trust increases to 40,000, and rather than reducing the Sport Otago funding, we just take that into consideration going forward. The one comment about the Sport Otago funding is that in addition to their grant, they receive almost $10,000 in a lease, which does not go through the grants process, so that sits in a budget line. And I would like to suggest that we consider reviewing that through the leasing and licensing policy that was adopted last year, and assess whether or not Sport Otago is a commercial entity or a community group, and then look at getting that leased into the grants process like we have with other groups across the district, so that they would then be applying for that amount going forward, rather than it sitting in an operational line, and that would help us as well to start getting everyone on a level playing field, because other groups have to pay rent as well, and that is included in their grant application.
Morena, just something else to add to. With the grant policy, it allows for people to apply for up to 3 years or 1 year one of the LTP. And Nikki's included in the matrix, the year 2 and year 3 criteria. So there is definitely some applicants that fit with having that multi-year funding. In the discussion of the report, we just highlighted some pieces that for various reasons that has been zeroed out. And there could be things like for councils having that flexibility in years to come in case things change, that you haven't committed to come too early. It allows that contestable process through to years 2 and 3. There also, we've got a new elected members rule coming through in 2022, so allowing that flexibility. But obviously this is an assessment process, and you are the assessment committee. A starting point for you to make decisions around them, that's your call. And the other thing I'd just like to add is the applications that we received, we acknowledge they're all fantastic projects and fantastic initiatives. And, you know, it was great to be able to read through them and assess them. Our conundrum is that we've got a limited budget that's been decided for this. And so we've just tried to create a structure for the council to review the applications based on the budget.
Thank you. You made no mention of the review in November, so there's a review for that.
Yes, thank you. The other thing, we're doing this process, and we found that there's some things, opportunities that we could improve on with our grant process, so we would like to be reviewing the grant policies in November. So this is really give it any review that comes
maybe I have to come back and reapply again and use 2 and 3.
Yes. And so they would actually probably need to come back the April round to make sure that they get their funding through July 1.
Okay. Sam? Oh, sorry, you finished.
No, no, just we appreciate it. We didn't see any new applications.
No, yeah, so there were quite a few applications that did come to council but actually were more relevant for a community board, so I've redirected them. And I do think that there's some work on our end on promoting council district funds and what sort of projects fit into the district fund, so that we can encourage more people to apply.
What does it say? Because it looks like a bit of a mockery of we're contestable when you don't have any competition.
Yeah. So in community board space, we have had quite a few new applicants, which is really exciting. It's just the district fund we haven't, and I think that's because there's probably a lack of clarity around what that means, to be doing something that benefits the whole district. And yeah, that's something we need to communicate maybe a bit clearer.
Okay, thank you. Taylor?
That probably is my question as well. Obviously, the applicants have requested their full amount for the year, and did you have any indication that other groups would apply in the further round?
No, we haven't, but we have in the past had situations where applicants have applied. So, for example, last year or the year before, the Goldfield Heritage Trust applied for some support with a heritage review across the district, and I wasn't able to bring it to council because there weren't enough funds available, so I had to do 4 different reports to each community board, and that meant that they didn't get any funding from the Tibia because there weren't enough funds available, but they did get funds from other areas, and that's something that really would have been better to bring back to the council. So it's good to be able to have some money set aside for when those do pop up. It makes it a little bit easier to treat them as district.
And I just had a further question. I just wondered if you'd had any feedback from the applicants on how they've done the process.
Not yet. I think that's something that we will have to go back to after, and part of our review, I would imagine, will be checking in with them on that as well.
Because it's a new system of way of applying.
It's online, and I think there's probably going to be an upgrade to the online system as well. So, but it's something we'll keep working through. We've tried our best to make it as simple as possible. Obviously, putting it online does make some people nervous, but we supported them as best we could, and everybody has managed to come through. Nobody has not given an application because of that. So.
Further questions?
Stephen.
Yes.
Nikki, I'm just Cohen, you've put that there's not a clear alignment with community wellbeing, community outcomes or council strategies, and I've gone back and looked at the grants policy, and the grants program will enhance wellbeing in the district, social, economic, environmental and cultural, empower local communities and facilitate the delivery of community outcomes. I can't quite get in my head how, I get the broader picture that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be funding health, but putting that argument to one side, which I've had with myself, I don't see how coherent with what it does, given the fundamental importance of Duxton Hospital and the client's partner, doesn't fit the criteria. There's some help on that.
Well, so when it comes to assessing against community outcomes, I literally looked at the community outcomes and what they were, and whether or not there was any relevance to the application, and in this instance, there wasn't a match. So, as you can see that as well with arts, there wasn't a match, and that's because there's nothing specific in the community outcomes about arts, but there is about heritage and there is about recreation, which is why I said that heritage and sports have a strong alignment with the community outcomes. In terms of well-being and empowerment, I mean, maybe it's what the application is for administration costs, and so that's what I'm assessing it against. This money is for administration costs and for buying equipment, so it's not really clear then what the wider benefit is in that regard. So that I have to make a call somehow. You probably have more background information about that than I do.
I'm not at all criticising your call. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to get understanding, because I get your point that we're paying for paper clips and paper and whatnot for the administrative costs. But if that money doesn't go in, then the other outcomes that Cohen tries to do will be $7,156 or whatever it is less. So it's kind of, yeah, I get that because it's being targeted to that, the broader community wellbeing perhaps isn't picked up, but it will be lost in the swings and the roundabouts.
I just add to that, Your Worship, and to you, Stephen, that your comment about our community outcomes have got supports and identifies certain aspects, but doesn't identify others like art, health, education, whatever. It's again, if that's signalling when we come to the review in November, we need to have a look at what the bigger picture, what those outcomes, those well-beings in the broader sense. Do we need to get a...
The outcomes were developed from community feedback based on the values survey, so we didn't add in things that we wanted to be in there, even if we did think that they had value. We only took the community sentiment to create those community outcomes, and there's just something, and it could be that sometimes people just don't think about certain things. They take them for granted. We do know that, but ultimately we didn't feel it was up to us to insert them in there.
Yeah. And if I may, there is another piece of work that we're working on the thing around wellbeing strategy, which will again hook into that community outcomes and delve into what does that mean for future community.
It just seems that we've got a judgment criteria on one hand that's excluding some sectors which on another part of the hand actually recognises as being important. So there's an inherent conflict.
But that's only one part of the criteria, right? So it's up to the applicants to make sure that it's clear how their projects empower communities and enhance community well-being.
And that again maybe some of the feedback you may wish to speak from the applicant is how clear or how transparent that is in the process as far as what they need to highlight.
Well, it's on the website. I have these, everything that's in the assessment criteria is on the website where they find the form. So I have tried to be extremely transparent about that.
Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Listen, I couldn't hear what Lee Overton was saying at the start of his the public forum because of the echo that's going on. But what was he saying about when COINC was first set up and what the council said it was going to do going forward?
I'm not
Neil,
sure.
can you?
Yeah, I think I could hear the question, but we had the same feedback issues when he was talking.
My take on it was he said we were a foundation member in the setting up of it and had some responsibilities. That was kind of what I took away. I could hear him all right.
So my question is that have we made a commitment in setting that up? Is what I'm worried about. Saying, are we going back on something we've said we've been doing? We've been funding for quite some time. And that's not helpful. That echo.
Yeah, I can hear the question. So I guess that is a good question. You understand what you understand what he's saying? Yes. Yeah.
Look, when we started back and looked through the files, we found these have been when the grant started, but we haven't got that documentation. It's documentation we would love to see it. That would help.
Okay, so that's something we need to.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay. Thanks, Neil. Good point. I think Longley was next.
I was just thinking that it's about the term that it doesn't apply with community outcomes, so we can do alignment with community outcomes, but it is our most important asset. So COINC is the sole shareholder of Dunstan Hospital. It appoints a director. It provides wellbeing in our community, economic wellbeing as well as health wellbeing. And reading through this metric, it's 100% support. It supports everything in the metric. And I think they deserve continuity, and we should show them wholeheartedly that continuity and support, because without our hospitals, they already struggle for funding, they struggle for everything they get. The money that comes into COINC goes towards buying equipment for our hospital. It's one of the best rural hospitals in New Zealand that we're lucky enough to have here, and I just think that we have to support with everything we have. And to me, it does fit every vitamin metric. Because of the economic well-being that empowers the local community, business health well-being. To me, I can't understand that it's been turned down at all.
Okay, well, James?
And I agree with Lindley, but I do think that maybe some of it has been identified in the application, which is obviously required by the applicant. And I don't making that money, but I just had an additional question. Alexandra Museum and applied for a hardship grant a couple of months ago, but do not appear to have applied for this round. I just wondered what their verbal consultation, communication have been had with them.
So they've had the same communication as every other applicant, which is letting them know when the funding round would open and inviting them to apply. Everyone's welcome to apply. They didn't receive any different messaging than anyone else. So they have applied to BCB, and that will be going to the community board on October 11th.
They have been also advised that verbally and various meetings done with the
We made quite clear them that funding applications to the board, but not from the council.
Well, I think it was made clear to them that the money they've received in the past was no longer in the kitty, but not that they weren't eligible to apply. They were still eligible to apply, but that money had been removed for other.
Correct, and they were explicitly advised they could apply.
Yes. Yeah.
And they chose not to because.
Yeah.
Further questions? Any further questions? So I need to ask about COINC's application. Do we feel that it's fair that it's removed?
I think we should support it for every year to give them the continuity and support from the future.
Yeah, so because when we go to move this, it covers everything. So if we're going to be talking about something individually, well, I guess we have to talk about it individually.
Do that one individually and the rest is a lump of, so that's the only one that's
potentially contentious. Certainly, I would like an individual vote on Cohen.
Okay.
I would just like to just consider that Sport Central application for the awards we had. From hearing the speaker this morning, I thought that actually.
Okay, let's deal with the current one first. So, well, yeah, well, let's go. Let's do it that way. So let's just show of hands, maybe, who supports the funding of the previous amount, which is 7,500. Well, I don't need to ask who's opposed because it's supported. So we have to put that back in.
Except for Neil and Shirley.
Oh yeah, how'd that go?
Yeah. Well, let's see. But I think we had enough votes anyway around the table.
I'm happy for it to be put back in, please. Shirley's a bit conflicted with what she said.
Oh, yeah, she is too. Sorry, yeah. All right. Okay, so that goes back in. Go back in. 7-5, whatever it was.
Is it just this year?
I think they're going to go back and look at the history, and maybe we'll come back and give us a report about how we initially started funding going forward. So that's still one. Yeah, so that argues 1 year only. It's 1 year only anyway. Yeah, yeah. And then we'll get some an update on how it got to be we funded it in the first place. The history, if we can find it. Okay. Dana?
That's Sport Otago $1,000 to support the annual sports awards, which are not being held in our area. No. However, they had advised that any guest speaker secured could be available for a speaking event in our area. I just thought there is not a lot of that going around at the moment, especially if it could involve motivating and empowering youth into more sport or alternative sports. And whether that, for the sake of $1,000, was something that we did want to look at. I certainly feel like it might.
I'll second that.
But
okay, but confusing in this process. Anyway, we've got a second.
Well, yeah, I guess I support what Tana's saying, that for the sake of how they jiggle it around, whether it's an odd thing.
So you're proposing that criteria by which you're making a grant?
Sorry, what criteria?
That a person that does offer inspiration, engaging young people does come here to speak?
Yeah, so they would be required to provide something within our area, not just for the event to be held in Wanaka. It would need to have a Central Otago activity.
So there's okay. And that one's from whereabouts is that speaker going to come and speak? At what?
So they would come up with something.
School.
So can we be clear on the resolution being proposed, please?
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to get my head around at the moment. Do you want to put some wording on?
That X dollars is granted to X organisation subject to X condition.
I don't know. So
I just wanted to clarify that in the application, they said that the speaker could be made available to come here, not that they would bring the speaker here. So maybe just to clarify, if that's what you're wanting them to do, then I think that should be clear.
well, then probably they need to do the work for that if they are wanting the money from us. And that could be fed back to them that we would look at that, but they need to have.
If you're going to have a paid speaker, they're paid by engagement. Yeah. And so they will want another X to come here, and I think we might be reaching a bit far. I hear where you're trying to go, but
I'd like them to be available for here, but I accept that the applicant probably has not done their required work for, in terms of something in our area, for us to put forward money for that.
Okay.
$1,000 goes towards paying the speaking fees for that gig. Doesn't pay, because these, on that circuit, they're professionals.
Depending who they bring.
Yeah.
So if we wrote into the recommendation that they had to come here and do something, that $1,000, who'd be up for the extra fees? Yeah, that's the problem.
Depending on who you get and what they want.
Well, yeah, but that's it.
Maybe they would like to look at that core.
Neil.
So, Neil, comment?
Only that I've suggested that there's some words there that you could use that Rebecca was looking for.
I'm not taking the minutes, Neil.
No. So I think
Sport Otago on the basis that the guest speaker is able to speak in the CO district to the satisfaction of the CEO. Not everyone sees your comments, Neil.
Yeah.
So to the satisfaction of the CEO is the trick to it.
Which is
It
why
could be
I
speaking
asked
in
them.
school engagement or breakup or a formal or, you know.
Yeah, I think,
They're going to come down to the Sport Otago gig on the Friday night.
Yeah.
They're probably flying in and flying out.
Yeah.
They're going to tie it in with something else.
I think we need to consider whether we're giving them the $1,000 as they've applied or whether we're not. I don't see.
Well, the recommendation is that we're not, and there's probably not sufficient evidence there to indicate that we should.
Right, leave it alone. Okay. Is everyone happy we leave it alone?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Or perhaps the communication could go back to them that it was on the basis that the event wasn't in our district. Just for their future reference, that it wasn't a no, it was a no cause.
No, because it wasn't in the district. Okay.
That's what's got me.
Everyone happy we move forward? Okay, so can somebody move that we receive the report? I'll do that. And we're going to go with option 1, subject to the amendment that we're paying with $7,500 to Cohen. Sorry. You want to receive it first?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you going to have A and B? I would. No, yes, just me. Stu moved it.
Yep.
Seconded it. Tamer. All in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 21.7.3, which is a district museum function. And the speaker to that is Saskia. Welcome, Saskia.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'll just make a few comments on the paper after read. So this has arisen from our long-term plan deliberations, in which you asked the sector proposed up an alternative for long-term plan, and you asked me to go away and work with the sector on some different options and report back, and that's the paper that you have in front of you. A couple of observations. Over the last few months, I've seen some excellent collaboration within the sector. There's a real willingness in the sector to make this work and for them to lead this from a executive recommendation as a trust. And there has been a lot of work put in by the sector. Particularly like to acknowledge the Heritage Trust who drafted up the trust deed that you see attached as an example, and also the job description. Noting they are not final and subject to any changes that we'd like to see. So when we went through the options analysis, the trust model really was best suited given the nature of what we're asking them to do. It's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a whole lot of money, 50,000. And you'll see in the appendix that we went through and realised a lot of different models for the sector delivery, and a lot of them have a lot of compliance, which we didn't really want to show a whole lot of the 50,000 in compliance costs and auditing fees, etc. We also thought about whether another trust was a good idea, and we were supporting Capital Heritage Trust and the Arts Trust, and that was raised during the deliberations. Where we've come to, and our advice on that is to give the sector the best opportunity for success, to focus it on the museum, and in the future, if the trust want to look at a different way of how they operate for a future discussion. But where we did land in terms of the work that we required to go through with the trust in our independent trust to work that through. We have recommended independent trust that be established. What we have put in our paper is a review period and some check-ins, because this is going to be a new way of delivery. So we have worked that through with the sector. So the sector has been involved in the development of this paper, and those dates and proposals were put to the sector. What I also recommend is that any decisions around ongoing funding, if you're happy with the review and where it's all got to, is that is considered as part of the investment work that I'm sure is to commence in that space. So pending the agreement of council today, the next steps would be to engage a lawyer. You'll see a recommendation there that we work and get some legal advice just to make sure the trustee is going to deliver on what we need it to deliver and help establish the trust. and then the remaining funding then to be transferred to the new trust body. And my final comment is around a set strategy that you see attached to this paper. So that originally sort of started its life as sort of more of a council-led piece of work, and we have included council's role in it, which of course got tied into the long-term plan. As we move through the review process, we've separated out council's role. And what you see before you today really is a sector's strategy. So they've got incredible ownership of that. We've had quite a few workshops with the sector over that. We've had the Otago Museum involved with that. So that really, what you see there in those council 10 has been on it. That really is the sector supports and work there. In terms of council's role, my proposal is that we wrap that up in that next piece of work that I'm going to start soon. So that's my comments on that.
Thanks, Oxley. So, yeah, questions, Lily?
Yeah, just thinking, considering the sector have already done a lot of work with regards to the trust and the job description, etc. 50k actually isn't a lot of money. So by reducing that 50k by legal fee, how much legal fee and why is it required?
So I haven't asked the lawyer on secret quote. What I understand, it won't be a huge amount to review the trustee. It'll be a huge amount if there's lots of issues within the trustee that we need to work through and do back and forth with the lawyer. I think the other thing for us to remember is why we want to move quickly on this, pending your decision today, is by the time the trust is set up and they go out to advertise and get a good person, we're going to be a few months away from getting someone started. So they won't actually, in terms of having a person appointed, it probably will be about 6 months of the financial year. And we thought about this when we were presenting this paper to you, and thought about doing a pro rata recommendation. I thought actually that's not fair if we take out the legal fees, and there might be some advertising fees. What that 50,000 was feeling about right. But I definitely, if the legal fees were to be excessive, I could come back to council, but I think it is going to be excessive.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
And I was going to raise this, but it segues on nicely from what Linley has said. I've done a few of these things, and the purposes that have been drafted here, I don't think are going to get past the charity services, and I don't think they'll get past Central Lakes Trust. So I very much think that a legal overview, you can frankly do these things, as long as you get the purposes right, not much else matters. But that purposes, there's some triggering things in the 1957, believe it or not, Act. It's older than most of the people in this room. Yeah, you've got to get them right. So I think that it's good that it has the legal overview rather than goes forward and winds up getting rejected by charity services and you have to go through it all again.
And my sense is that they're very open to giving feedback through the legal review and changing things like that to make it
So I think you've kind of explained it, given that it's only going to be for half a year. I know that Shirley had a query on this as well. Do you want to speak to that, Shirley?
Thank you. Yes, I too thought a lot of the trust is often done pro bono. I take Tim's point. You need to make sure you don't get charitable status. I wonder if we could put a limit on the amount of money from the 50,000 with no limit. So I wonder if we can limit the illegal amount.
So if I'm understanding you right, Shirley, are you wanting to change the recommendation to say something like up to $5,000 for legal fees? Have I heard you right, Shirley?
Correct.
Yeah, no, that's what she was saying. Yeah. Just a bit muffled, but so I think she would like to see a figure on that so we don't exceed. Was 5,000 right, Shirley?
I guess the trust that I've been involved with always had this for them pro bono, and generally to do this for trusts wanting charitable status. And I just think that on the back foot by reduced before they even to go. They and the documents that were accompanying this report showed well up.
Oh, we've lost you, Shirley. I don't know, maybe you need to get a bit closer to your screen.
Yeah.
I'm just about sitting on it. Okay. I'll make sure where you lost me.
Health and safety requirements.
What I'm picking up, Shirley, is that, are you saying that many lawyers will do this pro bono for a trust? So you're thinking even if a recommendation of 5,000 or up to 5,000, obviously if you get it for free, that'd be great, is too high?
I would have thought so, given that the trust document that they've already put up and half down the track and the experience that they've on with forming trust, the Heritage Trust, who's been working with as well. I think they have the expertise there ready to go. And I really question whether taking further legal advice is necessary.
Okay, I think Tim said that we do need to get the legal side of it done. So that's really, do we want to put a figure on the maximum amount we're prepared to spend with the lawyer?
I think it needs to be done, and it will cost what it needs to be cost. And if someone wants to do it for free, that's great, but we can't expect that that will be the case.
Trust because I feel bright people on today. Well, they're not a trust yet, but I think we'll leave it up to them. They'll be watching their budgets.
Okay.
Noting that my recommendation consideration does say, on evidence of the establishment of the trust and the signing of the agreement with the CEO, will release the rest of the money. Obviously, I've worked very closely with the trust on this next step, but the idea would be, because we've got the money here, we transfer it, is that would be a transaction between council and a lawyer. So whether or not we'll be able to negotiate a pro bono, I'm not sure. We'll definitely give it a go. We can definitely work with the trust on options for who's best to go to if you feel.
Okay. So no one wants to put a figure on the maximum? No. Okay. Personally, I think that if it was going to exceed something like $5,000, I think you should be reporting that. That's just me. Alrighty, thank you, Shirley. Did Neil have any questions from you? Talk to that. That's Neil. Oh, you're looking good today, Neil. Have you got any comments?
No, I'm all good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Being a bit smart there, never mind. Okay. So we have. Can somebody move that we receive the report? And unfortunately, it's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J.
I'm happy to. Stephen?
Yes.
Do you want to comment about anything?
No, it's just a comment. Everyone's happy to leave it the way it was around the table. So yes, so that was Nigel moved it. A seconder, please. Tamer, all in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. That's the end of my section.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That takes us through to item number 2174, the next stages of the Three Waters Service Delivery Reform. Very long report from our CEO, and Julie. So I will hand it over to you to speak to your report and answer questions. Thank you.
So the purpose of this report is to table information that you provided during the workshops over lockdown and the discussions had during that time, and also those matters that Council requested further advice on or proposed or solution to. I know the report is long, but a lot was discussed, and it was very important to make sure that information was also put into the public realm and to ensure that staff advice being given to the Council was recognised. So I'm going to take the report as read, and I'll make a few high-level comments only. I have Julie here as my very capable wingwoman to respond to any technical questions that you might have. And we also have, of course, Leanne in the room if there are financial questions too, beyond what the two of us can answer here at this table. Leanne didn't know I was going to say that, but I'm sure that she's there in the room. So the conversation around the issues and opportunities relating to the regulation and management of free water has been going on since 2016 and since the contamination event that occurred in Hadlock North. The government has now determined that the case for change has been made, and in June and July of this year, they released information and made announcements on the proposed reforms. The proposals, as you know, included an 8-week period for council to understand the implications of the reform announcement, to ask questions and propose solutions for the government, then to work on with councils and with Mana Whenua. I just want to be very clear that we are still in that 8-week period. There is no decision required by council at this stage. We anticipate that we will hear more from the government on the next steps in this reform process by the end of October. Following that, we will be able to advise on what kind of community consultation is required and what the final proposal from government looks like. As has been discussed, we have been placed in proposed entity D and allocated a proposed letter of funding of almost $13 million as part of those announcements. Whilst the government and also LGNZ, or Local Government New Zealand, consider that a national case of change has been made, this council will need to make its own decision in due course based on its own local context if the process to join entity D remains voluntary. We will know more about that by the end of October. So the report before you provides staff analysis of the information provided at workshops and assesses the government's proposal and currently available service delivery options. There are, of course, a number of significant issues to consider. Whilst it's really difficult to tie down specific numbers on a 30-year trajectory, any modelling we have looked at tells us that the inevitable increases our community faces in terms of water bills will be less if that service is delivered under the government proposal. We also know that removing more than 30% of our balance sheet has an impact, and that is hard to be certain about when there is also other non-water related reform in the pipeline as well. So the future is not yet known. There are considerations around governance models, of course, and of course, very importantly, there are considerations around community and consumer voice in the reform program and how we might think about what we can do to influence outcomes in that area. So the reform is very complex. The report covers a lot of that. I know it's dense and we know it's multifaceted. And I just want to end by saying thank you very much to this council and those other independent and community boards that have been so engaged and participated to the extent that you already have in this reform process. I know there's more to come. And that's for questions.
Thanks, Chair. So what I'm going to do, I'm really conscious that this is the first time we've actually had a paper essentially on this to people. I want to deal with questions first, but I'm also following questions going to give everyone a chance to just make any comments they may wish to make. But let's deal with questions from the report to start with. So just to clarify, that's from the report as opposed to the whole thing in general, which with all due respect to Sancha and Julie, let's try to keep our questions at this stage to ones that are more guided towards the end rather than Minister Mahuta. Martin.
The government mooted figures of what projections of what it's going to cost in 30 years' time. And what our projections are subject to inflation is quite a difference. The government's proposals are heavily weighted on the fact that this is going to save us a lot of money. This report agrees with that, but the figures show it's quite disparate, the gap. Why is that? What's the estimates from the government's being so radically different from ours?
So the reason why ours are lower, because we have done our 10-year long-term plan and 30-year LTP based on the standards that existed in 2020. We didn't allow increased budgets to increase the staffing levels to meet increased management requirements, and that's across ourselves and contractors. And we didn't increase the budgets to put in higher standards in, for example, wastewater and those sorts of things. And so there's a number of things there that they have allowed for that we haven't allowed for.
Thank you.
And I have outlined a number of those and other considerations in the report.
So yes.
Stephen.
In the report, there's some, I guess, there's section 78 and there's section 79 and what was the other one I was looking at? Section 130. And that's about the legality of what's happening and whether we can transfer assets and public consultation and whether it should have been in the long-term plan. There's a few issues there. I'm thinking, is that really of concern to us sitting at this table or not?
Leanne's got the answer. I'm not sure if you
I can see it here.
One of the statements in our long-term plan is very much a clear assumption as to by Audit New Zealand to assume status quo, because at that point in time we had no better information. But that has been the most challenging, and it's also adds to why our numbers are different, because we had to assume, and it's a stated assumption that it's status quo, and we all know that doesn't actually exist. I add that I think at the moment there is nothing else we could have added because there's not actually something doing on the table. But in the event that occurs, that will change in terms of significance.
Okay, so then the transferring of the assets or the value of the assets aren't going anywhere, but the transferring of the value of the balance sheet is a good word. According to what I read in that report, we can't do that under the current, at this current point in time without going through a process. So you're saying I can't, the asset?
You're talking about the council decision making and consultation under section. You refer to section 7, local government etc.
Yeah, correct.
If I could, my understanding from hearing Minister Mahuta at the local government conference, or it might have been Prime Minister Ardern, is in terms of section 130, they'll legislate that out.
Yep.
So yeah,
I figured that one.
they will do that.
Yeah.
And consultation, the anticipation is still that once the government has formulated their final whatever at the start of October, we will then be given sufficient time to undertake full consultation with our community, because there's absolutely no way that we'd be going and do this legally or morally without that.
So that would be about transferring assets.
Well, it would, hard to say, we'd have to look at what the consultation would say, but it would have to say along the lines of, do you think we should be in or out?
If I could just
With a lot more information there.
council significance policy, as well as the head, would say, actually states that any transfer of the water activities as a whole, including assets, is a significant decision, and as such it requires full consultation in accordance with the consultation requirements of the local government. So we would have to do full public consultation as things currently stand in order to make a decision to transfer the assets. Which is why we're not making any decisions, any decisions being made at this point.
Even if it's mandated.
No.
It's mandated that
It overrides everything.
if the government changes the legislation and mandates it, then we don't have a decision.
So what at some point we have to decide whether we opt in or out, unless it's taken off us. What I'm saying is, given those local government acts there, would we be breaking the rules by going down that path without going to the community and consultating?
Yes, if you don't, you need to, in order to make a decision to opt in or opt out,
Yeah.
you need to do public consultation or public consultation process.
and on every level, this decision was meet the significant requirements for that consultation.
Okay. Got Shirley and then Cheryl. Shirley, you've written a question up. If we can just hear your question, please.
Yes, given the number of people we have in our rural area, it's quite a large percentage. Can we emphasise the importance of discussions with private suppliers and separate these from some of the discussions for reticulated, because they're totally different issues for them, and a lot of the noise that we're getting and feedback from our community is from those who are on private water supplies.
So at this stage, I would say that in terms of the council making a decision around the activities that it delivers, that private supplies are considered in terms of the risk to the council and the community in the future of those supplies being held at the council, and that is commented on in the report that if a private supplies were transferred to council, it completely changes the economics of whether you would benefit from running that. So at the moment, we don't make it, just council isn't able to make a decision on the supplies that are delivered by other people, only on the supplies the council is responsible for. So the water, it's important to remember here we're talking about the delivery reform, not the changing the standards under the water services system. This is around who delivers the free water connection, not
Cheryl.
Mine's more of a comment rather than a question. And I go back to consulting with our community. That would boil down to very, very clear and communication to them as to how this works and how it's going to affect them. Given that they will then have the opportunity to give us their feedback, would we then are governed by their voice to follow what they say, as opposed to so if there's a higher percentage, then it depends how many people actually respond. But realistically, we can then, because we are the elected members, have to follow their decision. Do a very good job of making some decision. Thank you. You would not be bound by that consultation. It is a tool available for you to make decisions in your role as councillors of this district. And I think it's very important to understand that you would have the benefit, in all likelihood, of more discussion and knowledge on the topic than almost 90-something% of people that consult, because it is complex and we've had a lot of discussion. So you would look to that consultation to help guide you in your decision making, that we're not bound by it.
To be fair though, should we get to make a decision, and I put in a lot of emphasis on the should, it would then be for this table to decide whether we're going to do consultations such as we have with the long-term plan or anything else we've ever done, whether we would have a referendum, which I don't recall we've ever done, or we'd go another step, which is binding referendum. If we had a consultation, as Sanchez said, without a referendum, or with a referendum but a non-binding one, then the views of the public would be a consideration we would take into account alongside all the other aspects of this that we are aware of. If we have a binding one, then that's that. But we haven't come to that decision yet, and until such time as the government says what the next stage is and tells us what their final plans are, we don't have to have that conversation. Although I will note, I've received today on behalf of all of us a petition, 174 people asking for a binding referendum. I just note that for it.
I think when we understand more about the government's proposal at the end of October and what this consultation, if there is a consultation, what does that look like, then we can give some more advice on that and the pros and cons of different approaches we might take, and that can come very different.
Sure.
So I just want to say, so at the moment, on the website, on the Central Otago website, we've got these videos out there trying to educate the public. There's nothing on the government to educate the public.
And on TV.
I can't speak on behalf of the government, but on our website, we do have papers that have come from Central Government.
There's no question there's been significant criticism from the mayoral level of the government's lack of effort to inform.
I just wonder how many people go on and actually read what the government is presenting. I mean, I think to be perfectly honest, our community needs that information, but they're not prepared to go on the council website and actually read it.
At the start of this whole process, it was very clearly said by LGNZ to governments in the room when it was said that we do not want 67 different versions of the truth or this story going out with every council having to do the job of informing the public, and that's exactly where we've wound up.
Well, that's right.
And it's hideously disappointing.
That's exactly what you're doing, is going, they're educating via those little video clips.
Yeah, and if we didn't do it, then the public would be even more in the dark, because the government hasn't. It's failed.
Good point, you make council laws, because if you ask to go down the path of consultation or referendum or anything else, how do you have people actually accessing information to be informed, and then the feedback or decision that the votes that they make? It's a real challenge.
So therefore they don't want us to anyway, because they made the decision.
We can't.
But you can't, you don't know that, because if they don't have the information, you're only getting snippets of it, or they're only seeing what they think they know, and they'll make their decision based on what they think they know. If we don't get the information out to them, they don't know.
So therefore, the failure to educate the public is mandated to take it over themselves, because they've nothing to lose.
I just want to bring us back to the paper, so I'm going to give time for some general discussion, but I just really want to focus at this stage on staff's recommendations, and looking particularly at J, because a lot of the rest of them is noting, but it's the feedback of the government out of this, which is fairly crucial, and we've got something like 10 maybe points there, they're not numbered. Is there anything missing, Councillor, in terms of item J and the feedback to the government? And this is all culminated from the 5 half-day workshops that we'll have along the way that we've undertaken along with community board members. Is there anything missing there?
What page are you on, item J?
Page
228?
Yeah.
220, yep. So these are our concerns.
These are our concerns. So at this stage, the 8-week period which the government is given, which is extended to about 10 weeks, so it's the end of September for rounding purposes of it, for us to go back to LGNZ to say what our concerns are. And LGNZ will obviously then compile them, because I'm sure many of these concerns will be repeated by other councillors. There's also an opportunity, should we wish, to ask that be directed as well directly to the minister, if we wish.
Well, I think I still have one that isn't covered there, and it's really around the fact that examples that we've been given, and we've been talking to councillors and those that administer the water schemes in Victoria and in Tasmania, their model for running their waters, and they weren't 3 waters either, they were some just water. It's an entirely different structure to what's been proposed in New Zealand. So how do we know that we're going to get the same outcomes? So you look at all the figures we've got and look at all the projections we've got. But what we're proposing in New Zealand for managing it and the way that it's run is an entirely different structure.
Do you want to put them into some words that we could add to Jake?
Well, I could, but I don't want to sit and do it right at this moment. But yeah.
Probably, I mean, is that a question to the government, or is it a question that we put to ourselves if and when we get the chance to decide on it?
Well, I'm not saying that it should go to government, but it's still something that should be considered, because it's like we've still got in front of us a time to make a decision of whether we opt in or out. So we need to be pretty sure that the information that we've been fed from overseas, and I've listened, would work in New Zealand, given that the management structure that they're proposing in New Zealand is not the same as any of those other countries that we've looked at, or I've looked at. So how do we know we'll get the same results? That's really where I'm coming from.
Through the chair, I would say that what we've put in the report at the moment is the thematics that came out of the workshops we've had. It doesn't preclude us from continuing to dialogue in this 8-week period. So whether by resolution or not, there is no limit to the amount that we can go to government and say we've got concerns about this, or there's something we want you to consider, or to LGNZ in the discussions. And we can also table them retrospectively if you like, if the council sort of informally wanted one of those further things put up over the next 8 days.
Okay. Shirley, you've seen my comment above, which is, can we emphasise the importance of discussions with private suppliers and separate these from reticulated? I'm just not sure how we add that to, I mean, it's a wee bit like Stephen's comment that these are things that we're going to have to think about if when we get to decide, as opposed to further clarity from government. Unless you want
I just want to keep it in the conversation and keep it at the front of the mind that all of the information that we're getting is, well, it's emphasising the reticulated system, and a lot of our people are not in that system. So a lot of the information we're getting isn't as relevant to them. So I just want to just keep it in the discussions.
Okay, thank you. Neil, did you have your hand up, or did I see something from you?
You did, yeah. Just a couple of things is that, just to follow up on what Shirley just said, my understanding the rural side of things only becomes an issue if we have opted out. We keep some obligations in relation to their drinking water standards. Is that, have I got that right?
Not quite right. If we opt out of the government reforms and then a private scheme pulls the pin or fails, then it falls on us.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, that was my clumsy way of trying to say that. So that's a very important matter for when the time comes to opting in or out, which is my real question, because the recommendation J notes that, I think that should be that, we desirable to understand the community's views. So we're talking about the consultation process, but that's still not clear to me, and I don't understand enough. And if it's in the report and I missed it, I apologise. But how is it proposed by the government that that consultation with the community takes place? Because I think there's a big void there that I haven't got my head around. Are they going to do it? Because God help us if they are. With what they've done so far says that it's going to be nothing but an absolute utter cluster thing. Or are we going to be the ones that have to go and do it? We've got to go and consult on giving something away that actually is not our gig, in terms of it's not our proposal, for goodness sake. So somewhere, I think, in terms of the information with and what we're noting, it's probably saying, actually, we want some clarity about this, and how's it actually going to happen? Or can someone tell me that in the end of the 8 weeks, they're going to tell me the answer to that question?
Sanchia?
The government will advise next steps by the end of October, which presumably include what will be the pathway around consultation. What we could do, if we have one, is propose how we think it should occur. If there's a way that we think is best that the council has a position on, whether it should be done by council, done by government, tweaked by council, whatever it is you think. But the end, what we anticipate is that at the end of the 8-week period, which is in 8 days, the government will then come back to us with next steps around things like consultation and the reform process by the end of October.
Okay, thank you. That to me means then that actually we wait until they decide and see what they come up with, and then we simply go back and go whether it's we think it's right or wrong, because I think it's got to be a joint thing. We shouldn't be doing their gig. If they're the ones that are pushing this barrow, then let them push it. But actually, I'd like to be part of that pushing, and maybe what we could say now is that we'd like to think that if that's going to, the consultation process coming out of that, we need to be jointly involved on a TA by TA basis, not one cap fits all, please.
Yeah, I think exactly where you're sitting, Neil. We don't know yet. There has been no clear direction of what consultation is going to look like, whether we'll run away and do 67 different versions or whether the government runs it itself. And I cannot start to contemplate which of those would be the worst options. So I think we just have to wait and see. But nothing will stop us. If the government says we're going to do the consultation, there is still nothing to stop us doing our own, I wouldn't think. So let's wait and see where we sit.
So are you saying you're happy with I the way it is with that slight spelling correction?
Yeah, we're working in a void in a lot of this, so it's quite hard to get determinative on things. And I think it covers the fact that, presuming we still do get a choice, this council will be consulting with its community one way or the other. We don't know which way it'll be.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that. Well, not happy, sorry, I'll rephrase that.
Yeah,
I ain't happy.
satisfied.
I accept.
Satisfied?
I accept your logic.
Thank you. Tracy.
This is probably just a little bit circular to what's being said. In that clip from Minister Mahuta, when she was speaking to Jack Tame, she said, and I haven't got the exact words in my head, but she said that at the end of the 8-week period, she would use what the council's, part of the process would be that they would listen to what the community has said. That's only part of it, of them making their decision. But what I'm hearing today is that we can't do that without a change of law. So we can't give our decision or whether we opt in or opt out under that legislation. So, or have I missed? So
I think the point is that at the moment there is no decision to be made because there's not a confirmed proposal on the table. If at a point there is a decision to be made, then it must meet the certain requirements under the Act for consultation.
Okay. So I think what Minister Mahuta was saying in that interview, which I watched a couple of times for my sins, is that the things that we've got there in J, every council should be sending those back through LGNZ, and that's what they're going to look at. So their overall governance structure, things like that, they may tweak based on what we've said here. They may clarify some things within that structure and then come back sometime by the end of October and say, here's our final proposal. Do you like it? Are you in or you're out then? Because at this stage we don't know it. So this is the opportunity for local government to influence the government's final in or out option.
Okay. Thank you.
Is influence the right word?
Influence is as good a word as I've got, Stewie. All right, I'm not seeing any further questions. What I want to do before we go any further, and I again emphasise that I've had plenty to say on this topic in one way or the other as the Mayor, and nobody else really has in a public setting. So I'm going to go around the room and just give people their leash a little bit to speak of their concerns, or if they have questions which are outside of the report, pretty much just a brief opportunity to have a career on where we're at, without obviously keeping very firmly in our mind that we're not making a decision mode today. Stu, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you very much. I'm really struggling with the size of the operation, how the work will be done, how the authorities get together and who runs it. I don't trust the figures, and I understand that it's a big issue going forward. I struggle with how the regulatory bodies are set up. I do have issues that government aren't giving us the answers, and all the ones we had in our last workshop. And one that really worries me with the iwi involvement and sitting on one side of the board, looking at spatial plans and looking as a developer, and how you can stay neutral in a lot of those decision making. I think there's a lot of that stuff that's never been thought through, and I think it's way bigger than we probably ever imagined. It's getting more complex, and I think it's getting complex for everyone. I don't think we'll get to the end of it. It really worries me that it's just going to keep unfolding stuff that's, and someone suggested the other day, it's like building the plane and learning to fly it at the same time, and it's probably a very good analogy. There's so much depth behind it, and I just think really if the regulator, I think a regulator would be a good thing, and we all talk about it's going to change the way it is. There's nothing wrong with change, but it's just setting a structure at the moment, and there's so much that we're not being told, and the answers aren't coming back to us. To me, I think it's been the decisions going to be made by governments, and yeah, I know it's frustrating because a lot of people are very, very opinionated in our community, and it's quite interesting that I just said to someone the other day, the consultants will be on moon money, coming to talk to us. The government bring people in, and we're on a normal elected member's salary, making the biggest decision. If we get to make that decision forever,
and it's a tough gig. We don't get paid anymore, and we're basically the underdogs here having to fight the big fellas, and it's quite a complex, but definitely it's opinionated, and it's really brought our communities together one way or the other, because man alive, they're opinionated, especially where I live, so wait and see. But I hope really October gives us a bit more clarity, and I just think that they'll probably try to mandate after what the minister said and didn't answer. What she didn't answer in her questions on Q&A was more alarming than what she did answer. But, you know, we've got to deal with the cards we're played with here, and that's our job. We've got to keep open minded and make the decisions and bat off the front foot. And I think we've got a very, very good council, and we've been very well informed, and I know the people make the right decisions for their community, and every community is different. And especially where we've got the issues we have in our small rural communities, and you know, that's been brought up, they are going to be quite big in time. So that's me, what I know. Thanks, Jeff. Tracy?
For me, it's hearing the community sentiment. It's been a really big thing, and I think that probably will be echoed around the table. There's a lot of people, like Stu said, with opinions. Some of it may be misguided, some of it is from legitimate fears and things. And I think it's really important that as council we listen to our community, but we do have to listen to our community and think about how we can make the best decision for our community, not just necessarily for today, but for our communities going forward. And I think I agree with what Stu said, the depth of the decision making is huge. So I just, yeah.
Thank you. Lindley?
I'm just concerned that the proposed government model is not clearly indicating how the voice of community should be heard, and I think there's insufficient information and too many unknowns about the desired government model to give officers and elected members time to digest how it will affect community wellbeing and the local economy. I'm just wondering about the representation of the new entity, whether maybe iwi should be at the same proportion as other appointments. And I'm also really concerned about delays between the new entity and resource management and how this will affect our growth going forward. So that's my main concern.
Thank you. No. Sympathy for the government and trying to resolve the Three Waters issue. It is a major concern across the country. I'm worried about the amount of misinformation which is out there and the conclusions many people in our communities are jumping to. That is partially because there's not a great deal of information or clearly available. One thing is certain, we are living in very uncertain times, and I think all of us have got a role to play and showing some leadership, because change is afoot, whether we like it or not, and change is not something that people deal with particularly well, and that's going to be the challenge for all of us. Things are going to be different in the next 3 years, and our role is going to have to be to help this community go through and work through those changes. I don't think we're going to stop it. We just have to manage it. Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both Stu and Martin. I do have concerns. I've got concerns with the model for 30 years. I've always sort of said through this whole process is it's all very well, the reports that we're getting, they can give us a price or an estimate, which is all based on assumptions as to what we would be paying in 2051, 30 years from now. But ask the question, what will we be paying in 2 or 3 or 4 years, and no one can answer us. And they avoid that question, and that brings us back to the structure, and it also brings us back to the standardised charging, whether we're going to have it or not. I mean, these are questions that are not being answered, and it's very disconcerting, and it's it brings, I just don't, I'm uncertain and I don't trust what's been given to us at the stage. I just need more information, need more clarity, and I'm not 100% sure at this stage.
Nigel.
Tim, I'd endorse what Cheryl has said around the financials. The 30-year modelling is based on assumptions that are questionable, in my view. And there's such a high level of margin of error that there's little use. And what really is galling is that they're being used, you can see it on the dashboard that's presented in Science's report, they're being used as if they're facts. And with no attempt to correct or put them in context. What we do know is that we've been told that ratepayers are going to be paying another $600 to $800 a year, depending on who's delivering the service, or more. And it would be very helpful to have an outline how those charges will be impacting over the first 5 years rather than the last 30 years, in 30 years' time. And I'd link that to the standardised charging. We've been told that there's no assurance that there will be standardised charging. And the minute you say that, you might as well say all the financial modelling goes out the window, because if you look at how we've got the example of the electricity sector before us with charging. If we start charging where the costs lie, and we're widespread rural council, costs will be 10, 15, 20, 30% more depending on where you live. So how are you meant to make an informed decision on the financials against that background is beyond me. I have questions about the governance. I know that in Science's report you used the word the governance is advised, and I agree with it, provide opportunities for marriage to contribute to the decision-making process. My question to that would be, what is the constitutional basis for a 50-50 split between community and Maori and the governance model? Because that is certainly a departure from our constitutional practice at the moment. And I suppose the final thing for me is, people believe that we join a new entity, we know if we join a new entity, we'll lose 30% of our business. We believe that if that happens, the viability of the Central Otago District Council is then brought into question, as is our ability to represent our community. It is difficult to make an informed decision if you believe that choosing a particular option puts the future of your organisation at risk. So we're operating in a context where we've got, we're told there's a big piece of work on the future of local government being worked on. We're told there's a big piece of work on the future of the RMA being worked on, and we're being asked to completely reorganise the way this organisation works, and our income streams ahead of what we know are going to be big changes further to Three Waters reform. And it seems to me that things are entirely around the wrong way. And in particular, when we look at the communications from the government, it's hard to escape the conclusion that they're not really negotiating in good faith with us. So you have a minister who some months ago was putting her hand on her heart and saying it's up to every council will be given the choice of whether to opt in or opt out. In the event, some months down the track, we've now got a minister who is evading questions, not giving straight answers to that question of mandating. And you've got a government that is saying it's educating the public and putting out an advertising campaign that is at a preschool cartoon level and is not designed to inform, it's designed to get people emotionally involved with no facts at all being given. So not dealing with the government or a party that's not negotiating in good faith, it's very difficult to make good decisions.
Nigel?
Like Nigel, I'm extremely disappointed in the quality and quantity of information that's being released by central government, given that this is a proposed New Zealand-wide reform. I'm sceptical of the figures and some of the assumptions made, in particular out 30 years, and I think you only have to look at the building industry to see how inaccurate that can be. I'm concerned about the ability to manage growth the way our council requires under Entity D and how priorities will be categorised across such a varied area. And like some of the others around real or perceived conflicts of interest and representation in that governance structure. And I think, like Nigel again, it is absurd that this government is pursuing Three Waters, RMA and local government reform at the same time, and that they should be picking one and working from there.
Okay, so I'll start my concerns by saying, whilst I'm concerned that the status quo is gone, and we know that it's gone, so there's going to have to be some improvements across New Zealand. I have some doubts about the management structure, and I've raised that before, because the model that we're looking at here doesn't compare with what I've looked at out overseas. So then how can we then subject the figures forward and say that we'll make the same savings if we don't, if the management structure is quite different? The legality of transferring assets, I've raised that, and I still don't quite understand whether we can technically do that until we've gone through that consultation process. And I'm concerned about the standardised pricing across all of Entity D, because that's been raised before too. We're not assured at this stage that that will be the case. Yeah, so that's pretty much me. And then the public consultation, well, I mean, I guess that everybody at the table has raised that. There hasn't been any. And then we're getting in your own, in my own ward, I'm basically getting challenged a lot about what's going on, and I'm giving the information as best I can, but it's almost like the council's the enemy at the moment, unfortunately, and maybe that's the game the government's playing. So that's me.
One of my concerns is, do we have any evidence that the real long-term costs will go down with a larger entity? We're being told that funding and economies of scale will lead to cost efficiencies. But does this happen in the petrol, the electricity industries? And if not, why doesn't it? For example, we don't even get social housing here, which is another bundled industry. And how would this bundling that we're being told will provide efficiencies, how would that actually work in rural areas?
Shirley.
Thank you. And I just want to thank the staff too for the tremendous amount of work they've done in helping us negotiate this really complex and difficult process. The depth of decision making is massive and totally disproportionate to the amount of information and clarity we've been given, which doesn't make it easy. I think a new identity is a good idea, but not sure about the levels of representations. I also think an ombudsman is a good idea, but want to make sure that there's clear accountability for that position. We've seen what the Commerce Commissioner electricity, so we'd want an ombudsman to be a bit better in that space. I also think that misinformation is a big worry, because that's taking up a lot of space, and not only do we need to get, or do we need to have good information, but it needs to be correct information, and we're just not getting any, so misinformation is filling that void. And I too really don't have great confidence in the numbers with regard to the savings. Thank you.
Neil.
Yeah, kia ora. You've got to say, when are we going to learn? And it's not just the we, it's not the people in the communities, it's our leaders. There's been comments made about having some standardised charging. We led the way in this district when we did our digitalisation of Three Waters, and I was one of those people that said, no, this is not a good thing. Ultimately, we actually said You're getting the same service, you're paying the same cost, that's a good thing. Well, if mere plebs like us can come up with that, those ones that are more than mortal at central government must better get that right. They're talking about the same level of service, but that's only part of the battle. It's the communication so far from central government over this whole matter is the biggest single concern that I've got, because you have got a whole lot of people there that just don't understand what's happening. Keep on hearing about asset stripping. We need to be paid for these assets. Well, that's really simple. We don't need to be paid if you're not going to cost you anything by losing them. But people are genuinely concerned that's what's going to happen, and that's not our doing. We're the ones that are having to answer those sort of questions. There's the easy comparison is to the electricity reforms, and while there will be many people that think they've been great, there is a vast majority that think, well, that's not the experience that I've had, and it's only cost me more. And they were based on models of other organisations and other countries as well. And so here we are comparing to Scotland and other success stories, but then we're slowly starting to hear about how successful they might not have been. And is anybody listening to that? And the biggest thing here is that what choice? It's a fact. The status quo is not going to stay. But what is the choice we're really getting? And I think it's Hobson's at best. And decision making. So what decision? In the end, are we going to get to make a decision? I think, and ultimately at the moment, we could end up being the scapegoat for a decision that actually we can't make. I only hope that really, Nigel said it in good faith. And I'm not going to be quite so bold to say that there's not good faith, but I don't really think that the comments that are coming back are being well received, because it's just showing the shortcomings in the process so far. And for goodness sake, if we can't get this right, what hope is there for the other two things that are happening at the same time with the RMA and local government? We're going to end up in a real mess. So I really hope that with what we're recommending today, which is not a lot of decision making, it's about noting and passing on some feedback to LGNZ and I hope the Minister as well, when we discuss the recommendation, that we actually do get listened to, because if we don't, it won't be for our lack of trying.
Thank you everybody, and thank you staff for the work that's gone in, not just this paper, not just the workshops that we did, but everything, because the distraction from business as usual, I know in my life, and I'm sure in yours, Julie, and yours, Santia, that this reform, far less the other reforms it caused, is just staggering. And then you just throw a small thing like a global pandemic and lockdowns into the middle of it. I think we've heard around the room today very clearly what needs to be remembered by everybody inside this room and outside of it, that there is no status quo, that the changes are coming. It's just how those changes are paid for. I think Shirley raises a good point that is lost in a lot of this discussion, is whatever decision this council makes, if we get to make a decision, isn't going to impact on what's happening with the private water suppliers. They need to look at their own situation. I've had meetings with some who are going, well, what are we going to do about the changes that will come? The Water Services Bill is heading into its second reading with no significant changes from its first reading, other than my understanding is you've got 2 years instead of 1 to register. Otherwise, it's happening, and so that's outside of this room, although the consequences of that will impact on our decision when we get time to make it. I know I've received a fair amount of criticism from members of the public because we haven't made a decision. In fact, I get some interesting comments such as, you need to have a referendum and say no now, which is actually contradictory. But I'm grateful and in admiration of this council that we have taken this in a workperson-like manner. We recognise that we don't have to make a decision now, and that actually making a decision now before we know what the final government model is would be a mistake. But we will consult with our community if we're given the opportunity to do so by government. And I'd really emphasise that, because at this stage, I'd be very surprised. As I say, I watched that interview with Jack Tame twice, and there's some very good sidestepping. Christian Cullen would have been proud.
She's not that agile.
Right, folks, we have recommendations A through to L. I'm not hearing any great impetus to add or change anything there, so I'm going to move those if somebody will second them. We will have discussion though.
Did you want to add notes to one of the bullet points on J?
Thank you. Did you want to add something to one of the bullet points on J, Neil?
No, I was talking about I, but I think that I accepted your advice.
All right, notes that it would be desirable. Yeah, there was the that needs to be a that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're going to breathe through our notes for a little bit longer on that one. Thank you, Daywan. Does someone want to second those? Thank you, Tamer. Any further discussion, councillors? Not for today, anyway. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody. I thought we might progress through the Drippingdale scheme now, Julie, if that suits you, and start your other stuff. We're a wee bit ahead of schedule. People need a leg stretch. We're lunch. We'll get this one done, then we'll have lunch.
Yeah.
Right. Has anyone met Ian? I'm not sure we have. Everyone, this is Ian. Julie, I'll leave it to you.
Yes, so Ian has been on some meetings, but virtual, so you won't see him soon. But Ian Evans, so he is our Water Services Manager, and Ian has come to us from Southern District Council. We've been on the same on actually had waste down into the southern as well. So.
Ron, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, councillors. Good afternoon now. Yeah, look, it's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to be able to talk to you. And really looking forward to the challenge of working with you on some of the water reforms, just on the challenges that we have that I've noticed in the short period of time that I've been here. So yeah, obviously the purpose of today is to give you an update on the Drippingdale water supply. So I'll basically take the report as read and just highlight a couple of key issues, key points. So Council took over the operation of the scheme earlier on in the year. In the 5 months or so that we have, both William and the staff have now had a chance to operate the scheme and to better understand some of the issues and possibly we may not have understood during the due diligence we took before we took it over. It's kind of resulted in the change in scope of work that was previously indicated in the report. And the proposal now indicates that we will get a lot better benefit from replacing a length of overland pipe through Corru Gorge that freezes up during the winter and results in a loss of supply to properties along that length. Upsizing the length along Drippingdale Road, installation of some basic telemetry to the pump station, and the purchase of some critical spares, the idea being that we add as much resilience into that scheme as we can. The estimates that received today from Fulton Hogan indicate that work can be achieved within the previously approved budgets. But it is important to note that further work will be considered following the upgrade of the wider Cromwell hydraulic model. And just another important indication to note is that some of this work is stimulus funded, so needs to be completed by March next year. Yeah. So I'm happy to take any questions in this.
Firstly, I'll just apologise because again, despite telling myself I wouldn't fall into the trap and taking somebody else's. Yeah, Nigel, this is yours.
So if you wouldn't notice.
I'm going to have to start taking bets with myself. It's the only way to change my behaviour. I'll shut up.
You'll do it at lunchtime.
Are there any questions?
I have some questions, please. Can I written them down? How did we miss a pipe that was above the ground?
So we did our initial analysis around the time of lockdown. Yeah, if you don't get told a lot of these things, you don't even know where the pipes are. So it's very easy to miss the pipe. Well, there is a pipe in the ground. They've just abandoned that pipe because it leaks, and another one over the top.
Which leads on to my next question. Is there any indication that we've been misled, I guess, in terms of the current status of the scheme when we were asked to take over?
So what I would say is that with these private supplies, the level of asset data that's available is basically in the head of the person who operates the scheme. And so we're absolutely reliant on them telling us what they think is important for their day-to-day operation might not be what we think is important for long-term management of the scheme, particularly around things like all the service spillage and requirements around residual chlorination and that sort of thing. They're not even looking at that kind of thing when they're running these supplies because they're not operating them to those sort of standards that we have to. So I think we'll look at this as this is the first private supply that we're taking over. There was some complicated factors around the why we took this over. It would have been said that we actually owned it in the first place. And so I think we went into some lessons around just to expect more issues than what we're perhaps advised at the time. I will point out that I did actually, unlike me, add a very lofty contingency onto the original estimate because I anticipated that it would be more for this. The other thing with the Drippingdale scheme is that there's exceedingly high growth happening in that area, and that was one of the reasons why the private supply wanted to have that operation in that area because they weren't getting development contributions on that. And so part of the work that he was suggesting is actually to accommodate growth as security on there as well. So we will get those development contributions.
How much extra is it going to cost above that 600,000?
It's difficult to say whether it's just for that. So part of the chromal hydraulic model that we're looking at, we've actually got a plan for putting a new pipe into that boom. And that was going to go up piece anyway. Taking that pipe onto Drippingdale at the other end, we actually create
ringfest, which means the water will be a lot fresher. There'll be no issues with the chlorine levels or anything like that, but potentially if it's got a bit more light.
And it gives them increased pressure. So we're improving the scheme sort of easily through some of the work we were doing, but there'll be a bit of extra cost that we wouldn't have had we not been paying this scheme now. So it's difficult to say, is it extra or is it an improved level of service that we get?
Which is good, and they need it. But I did have one other question, and that was that it talks about replacement of laterals to the boundary and possibly beyond it in poor shape. Would that be our responsibility?
We will be looking at that closely. We will probably need to replace the laterals to the boundary. Internally, we'll have a look at the legalities around that.
Okay, Tracy and then Neil, I think, please. Tracy.
My question is with regards to the stimulus funding. If we end up in another lockdown and Fulton Hogan can't do these type of works and everything gets squeezed, has there been any word about extending the time frame for using the stimulus funding if we have another issue with the pandemic?
So just to give you a bit of reassurance, 2 days into the last lockdown, I emailed our infrastructure partners to advise them that there was no effect our delivery program. I think most other councils in New Zealand did the same thing. So we are just waiting to hear back from them. We would anticipate even back to the last lockdown, these needs to be back. We haven't been advised that there will be yet though, so we're just carrying on. Yeah. But you do right, any more lockdowns, and it's not just the ability of the contractors to get out and do the work, it affects the supply of materials that, yeah, all the investigation will be.
Thank you.
Neil?
Yeah, two things. Firstly, just Tama's questions. I know the area pretty well, Tama, and the pipe above the ground is pretty typical of an organisation that thought they were running a scheme and did it on a Heath Robinson budget, and then found out that actually there was a council had an involvement in it. So I think the people that are running the scheme currently wouldn't have even been aware of that pipe repair that had been done in that manner. But that to one side, Julie, I took from the report, and you've just made a comment that made me think I've got it wrong, is that the $600,000 was going to be sufficient. Are you now saying that you're not convinced that it will be?
The initial report said this is what we think is needed to bring the supply up to the New Zealand water standards.
Yeah.
What we're saying is we can do that for $600,000. What we're saying is that future renewals on that supply are going to be higher than we would expect to see on a council supply of that age. And I think that that's something we should be mindful of when in future private supplies come in, because they're not always constructed in the same manner or the same level of materials that we might do. And you know, we did receive quite a bit of criticism at the time about gold plating, what was going to be required of the council. So I guess this is just a bit of an evidence that we need to be realistic about what the costs of upgrading to meet requirements are, and not taking too much account of what suppliers actually telling us at the time.
No, thank you. That clarifies that, and I think that it means that our initial assessment of the scheme and what it might have cost going forward was not incorrect. And the comments about gold plating are from people that just didn't know how to do things properly, and that's not being disrespectful to them. It's just the fact that they weren't water scheme operators and we are. So yeah, that does make much more sense. Thank you. And the other thing too, I suppose, at least now we, I know there's a consent application for a subdivision being done, and there's going to be a development contribution of $10,000 for a connection to the water scheme going to be added to it, which is something that the previous operators didn't do because they didn't know they should have been doing it. So we're heading down the right path as what I expected we were going. So thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Any further questions?
So can I just clarify through you, Nigel? Once this body of work's done, that's it. Something would have to come back to us to do more, right?
Correct.
We've reached a point in the road, and you think the 600 grand will do it?
The indication from Rogan are that the scope of what we're proposing here can be done for the 600,000, yes.
And bearing in mind that, like any of council's supplies, there's ongoing work going to be required.
Yeah.
And we're just saying that the level of ongoing work on this one might be slightly higher than on another part of council.
Yeah, and maybe just to comment on that, this is not a test case, the first for a council taking over a private supply, and what it indicates is that every private supply is going to have different considerations, and we know with this one that the arguments over there was council owned and run jointly, and that we've arrived at the decision. But what it indicates, I think, is that when we look at other private supplies, we need to have some mechanism to recover the costs of upgrading schemes to be run by council that allows by lump sum payment or targeted rate to recover all the costs over time, rather than just saying, here we've got a budget to get the scheme up to the correct standard to join, and then discover once we get into it and the nuts and bolts of it, there's actually a lot of extra costs that you didn't know about. And it's going to be interesting to see whether we can find a mechanism that allows us to keep pushing, recovering those costs from the people concerned over and above normal rating for supply of water. So
one difference here, Nigel, though, is that we already owned this one in the first place.
Yeah, I know. Which is just to say, I'm sure every private scheme that comes to us is going to present a different set of problems, but it's having an open-ended way of recovering ongoing costs associated with taking over those schemes is going to be an important piece of work.
But for the moment though, that choice is ours, isn't it? Like if other than Drippingdale was a special case because it turned out, much to our surprise, horror, that we owned it. If a scheme that we have nothing to do with comes to us at the moment, we have the option of saying it gets brought up to standard or saying, no? Is that right? Are we obliged to take the scheme over? Because I suspect we're going to have a few asking in the near future.
So the water services bill, if things go really bad for a supplier, and they just say, we just can't do this, it's not our way, we don't actually have a choice, but we can put funding mechanisms in place, I believe, to recover costs.
My question is now, not when the water services bill passes, but now.
Well, now you make a decision and that's.
Yeah, we don't have to do it. So
We don't have to do it.
So that's another game changer, that once that bill passes, we do.
Look, I actually read through the Health Act recently, and it does actually have a lot of the requirements of the water services bill, but they were largely unenforceable.
Yeah.
The water services bill enables enforcement of the things like that. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's one of the changes that you don't realise. At the moment we've got a choice, but once that bill passes, we don't. And where does that go from there? This is a salutary lesson in what could be lining up at our door.
I agree.
And look, I would just add, we have had approaches from another one recently, so we've actually got 3 in the lobby waiting to look at, and the drinking water assessor has raised 2 other private suppliers that they have concerns about with us, that they want us to become involved.
And a lot of the ones that we've got out there will be open races. Drippingdale will be Rolls Royce in comparison. Throwing down Rolls Royce. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, I've got Tracy and then Neil.
Oh, just following on that line of thought, one of the Three Waters webinars brought up that issue of what's going to happen with small local supplies, and I actually wrote down, as I was looking through this, and it said that it will not be supported, what I wrote down, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, it will not be supported by local council, it'll be done by the new entity if that comes into place. So has that been that was what was touted several months ago?
If we, under the, I'm not stumped on it.
So you, yes, correct. If we opt out, then the decision is required to be made, we would be liable. If we opt in, the entity would be.
Okay. That's for all small group, like we're talking about small responsibilities.
I would just add to that the water services have been courtesy code, and they haven't made any changes other than it's.
The only other caveat to that though is in the water services bill at the moment, it just talks about councils. My understanding of that is because the bill can't talk about entities that don't yet exist. So one would, once the entities come into play, that bit of law will say council or entity if it comes.
Okay, Neil.
Yeah, Julie, I'm just interested to find out, when we originally did the resolutions to take the scheme over, we said that $300,000 of the 600 would come from the Drippingdale Community Water Scheme Connectees, with $100,000 from their accumulated fund. How's that gone? And what was their reaction like? Did we then all of a sudden be getting bills for having to pay rates for the connection to the water supply? Is that all gone through okay?
So my understanding is the rates. So what we are doing is bringing another report back to you to give you an update on rating arrangements. So they are currently all being rated as standard water charge, every ratepayer pays. Plus they're being charged a volumetric rate of 1,000 litres per day because that's what the restricted provides them. So even if they're taking less than 1,000 litres a day, they'll have to pay 1,000 litres because we've got. We actually had to go out and do a specific type of consultation for a targeted rate, which we inadvertently missed in the LGP process. So we are going to go out and do, we're just waiting to see what ends up happening around annual plans. If the annual plan needs to be consulted on, then you'll include it in that. If it doesn't get consulted on, you'll just do it specifically to the Drippingdale community. And then that targeted rate will apply from the 1st of July next year. They will still get charged the same amount of money. It's just the date that starts is later. They haven't come to us and said here's $100,000 towards it, so I'm not too sure how they're doing it on that up to my
Yeah. Thank you. I'm pleased to hear there's a report coming because I don't think we need to let that slip through the cracks.
Okay, any further questions? If not, we've got a mover for recommendation on page 271. Recommendations A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
No, it's only A to E.
Okay, E. Oh, sorry, no, it's in the wrong page. Okay, A, B, C, D, is E. Can we move up?
Yes, you do.
Stephen, can we second? Any further discussion? All those in favour? Right. Yeah. Thank you. Lunch.
Hang on.
We have Chantal.
Yeah.
Oh,
Are we doing next one?
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Ah, sorry. It's up to Nigel, says. Chantal's here to present the next one.
Oh.
Oh, I feel welcome.
What time are we going to be back after lunch?
1:30.
1:30.
Right. 3 minutes, Chantal, thank you. All those in favour?
All right.
Thank you. So we're on item 21.7.6, procurement for Three Waters stimulus projects.
Very on the spread. Obviously, there's a couple of updates to the Three Waters stimulus program as we move through the months. The first one is that we're changing the Manihurrity at Pipe Crossing to an alternative option, and that alternative option is to upgrade the Russell's pump station instead. And the second one is changing the Bridgefield Falling Main for a Clyde Falling Main. So the current procurement policy has an exemption from open advertising available with approval where there's limited time for the procurement process. We've only got around 6 months left, assuming there's no extension to the stimulus funding to complete the rest of the program. So if we go through a tender process now, it's federal release at that time taken out of potential construction. So our recommendations are A, to exclude the level of significance, B, to note the updates on the Three Waters stimulus program of work, C, to rescind previous decisions to tender the Manihurrity Pipe Crossing and stimulus funded Falling Main project, and D, agree that the remaining work to be funded with water stimulus funding be undertaken as a variation to the water services maintenance. Any questions?
Manihurrity pipe construction was not tendered by two large contractors because they didn't have the capacity, want to carry the risk and the complexity of the project. Is it appropriate for this to be given to our water maintenance services contractor, and do they have A, the capacity, and B, the needed expertise?
Yes, so it is putting a pipe under the river was highly complex. They have told us they have the capacity to do these formats with them, but they're working with us on the design so that we can make sure we can get them done. So they've made a commitment to do them.
Does that elevate the risk for us?
I would say that probably reduces the risk for us because they've been very involved in the design to help make sure that that what's getting done is achievable within the timeline.
Councillor Gillespie.
Neil.
Yeah, please don't take this as a criticism, but it's a question, and it goes back to the whole Three Waters reforms. Chantel's just said we've got 6 months to get things done, so time's of the essence and to access the stimulus funding. So we've kind of got arms up our back. But is this a direct result of the pressure being placed on Julie, you and your team, Sanchia, you and your team, to do this other Three Waters crap that's not our BAU? It can be a short answer.
It's that, and there's a few things that have been in play there, but that is part of it. We have a high workload. We've also been missing some key staff, particularly a water services manager. We've had some shortages in our project delivery team, which have just been filled. So while we've actually had some really good recruitment successes recently, we've had a period of time where we've been quite under-resourced in people's projects and water services team. And absolutely, we have a massive workload, and adding another 9.46 million of capital works to be delivered within a specific time frame. I know that was intended to be a great economic boost for contractors in the region, but it turned, nobody at that time at the end of March 2020 anticipated the situation.
So that's a yes. So that's a yes. Thank you.
There was a yes. Yes, Neil, yes.
I just wondered if there was an additional update on some of the other work that hasn't yet been completed, that Otago pressure upgrade, the data collection.
The data collection is underway. The Otago water pressure upgrade, they're progressing on that. They're putting pumps in there now. The reservoir is tendered, awarded, and about to start on site. They've just been delayed because of COVID. About Naseby, we have to get down there. So there is a lot of work moving. And the design's already, we're going to go out of this meeting today and they're going to order the materials. We're all ready to go on this other project.
Okay. I think Neil's comment is group one time is of the essence. And no further questions. We've got recommendations A, B, C, and D. Have I a move up? Emma? Stu? Any further discussion? In favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Chantel. Lunch.
All right, so thank you, Nigel. We'll adjourn now for lunch, folks who are online watching. There is a new link for the afternoon session. This one has to close and a new one opens, so that's available on the council website. Shirley and Neil, we will see you after lunch, and Neil will save you some cake.
Thank you.
Just give my cake to Louise, please.
Look at the man.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, him do it.
Yeah.